My name is Nora Callahan. I am 34 years old. And on the night of my wedding dinner, my husband's mother looked me in the eye in front of 60 people and said, "We expected someone with a little more substance." She said it with a smile, the kind of smile that is designed to hurt you without giving you anything to point at. I sat at that table in a dress I had saved 4 months to buy. My hands were folded in my lap. My husband Daniel reached under the table and squeezed my fingers. I did not cry. I did not respond. I just looked at her and made a decision. I decided to wait. What happened 2 hours later, when a woman none of us had ever seen before walked through that restaurant door, is something the Hargrove family has not recovered from to this day. Before I take you into that dining room, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel if you are new here, and drop your country and your local time in the comments right now. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to where this really started. I grew up in a small town in rural Kentucky. My father worked at a lumber yard. My mother cleaned houses 3 days a week and did alterations for neighbors on the other days. We were not poor in the way that means hopeless, but we were poor in the way that means you learn the price of everything before you learn anything else. I was the first person in my family to finish a 4-year degree. I paid for it myself through scholarships, part-time jobs, and one very long year of eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 5 nights a week. I graduated with a degree in accounting. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina at 23 with 2 suitcases and exactly enough savings to cover 2 months of rent. By 28, I had built a small but steady client base as a freelance accountant. I was not wealthy, but I was stable. I was proud of what I had built, and I had done every single part of it alone. I met Daniel Hargrove at a client networking event in the spring. He was there representing his family's commercial real estate firm. He was the kind of man who listened when you spoke, not the kind of listening where someone is waiting for their turn to talk, the kind where they are actually absorbing what you are saying. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. In those 2 years, I met his family exactly 4 times. Each time felt like a performance review I had not been told I was sitting for. His mother, Patricia, was a woman who had grown up with money and then married into more of it. She wore it the way some people wear armor. His father, Gerald, was quieter, but followed Patricia's lead in everything that mattered. His older sister, Candace, was pleasant on the surface and cutting underneath it, the kind of person who wraps an insult inside a compliment and waits to see if you notice. The first time I met them, Patricia asked me where I had gone to school. When I told her, she nodded slowly and said, "That's a solid little school." Solid little school. I had graduated in the top 8% of my class from that solid little school. I did not say that. I smiled and moved on. The second time I met them, Candace asked me what my parents did. When I told her about my father's work at the lumber yard and my mother's cleaning jobs, she tilted her head and said, "Oh, that is so wholesome." Wholesome, like my parents were a folk painting, like their entire lives were decoration. I went home that night and told Daniel I felt like his family was measuring me against a standard I had not been shown. He held my hand and told me his family took time to warm up. He told me they would come around. I believed him because I wanted to. We got engaged in November. The wedding was planned for the following September. It was not a large wedding. 80 guests. A venue in Charlotte that Daniel and I had chosen together. Simple, clean, beautiful in a quiet way. The wedding dinner I am telling you about was not the wedding itself. It was a formal family dinner held 3 weeks before the ceremony. A Hargrove tradition, Patricia explained. A chance for both families to come together before the big day. My parents drove 12 hours from Kentucky for that dinner. My mother wore her best dress. She had bought it 2 years earlier for my cousin's graduation. She had it dry cleaned, specially for that evening. My father wore his only suit. He had polished his shoes himself the morning they left. I picked them up from their hotel. My mother hugged me and asked if she looked okay. I told her she looked beautiful. She did. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had worked hard her entire life and loved her daughter completely. We arrived at the restaurant. The Hargroves had chosen it. A private dining room at one of Charlotte's oldest and most expensive establishments. I had looked it up beforehand. The tasting menu was $220 per person. My parents had never been to a restaurant like that in their lives. My mother read the menu quietly, without saying anything. My father asked the waiter in a low voice what one of the dishes was. The waiter explained it kindly. My father nodded and thanked him. They were trying. They were trying so hard. Patricia noticed. She noticed the way a person notices something they have been looking for. Dinner began smoothly enough. Daniel sat beside me. His father, Gerald, made polite conversation with my father about the drive from Kentucky. Candace asked my mother about our hometown. On the surface, everything appeared fine. Then, Patricia raised her glass for a toast. "We are so delighted," she said, "to welcome Daniel's chosen partner into our family. Marriage is a union not just of two people, but of two worlds. And we certainly look forward to seeing how these two very different worlds come together." Two very different worlds. She said it warmly. She said it with her glass raised and her smile perfectly placed. 60 people in that room heard it as a gracious toast. I heard it as exactly what it was. My mother heard it too. I saw her fingers tighten slightly around her water glass. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at his mother with an expression I could not fully read. The dinner continued. Candace began talking about their family's vacation home in the south of France. She asked me casually if Daniel and I had decided where we were honeymooning. I told her we were going to Portugal. She smiled. "Portugal is lovely. Very accessible. Very accessible." Then Patricia leaned slightly toward my mother and asked, "And do you travel much, Ellen?" My mother smiled. "Not much. We do not really have the budget for it." Patricia nodded. "Of course. That is very practical of you." Then Gerald said, without looking up from his plate, "Daniel tells us you do alterations work, Ellen. How charming." Charming. My mother's face did not change. She has spent her entire life in rooms where people underestimate her. She has learned to absorb it the way stone absorbs rain. But I felt something building in my chest that I had been holding down for 2 years. Then Patricia set down her fork. She looked directly at me, and she said it. "We expected someone with a little more substance, Nora. For Daniel's sake, we do hope you grow into this life. It takes a certain kind of woman to carry the Hargrove name properly." The table went quiet. Not completely. Conversation still murmured at the far end. But the immediate circle, my parents, Daniel, Candace, Gerald, Patricia, every single one of them went still. Daniel's hand found mine under the table. My mother's eyes came to me immediately. Not with tears, with something fiercer than that. I opened my mouth. I did not know yet what I was going to say. And then the door to the private dining room opened. She was perhaps 60 years old, silver hair cut short. She wore a simple dark jacket and carried a leather portfolio under her arm. She was not dressed for dinner, she was dressed for business. And she walked into that room the way people walk into rooms when they already know they own whatever is about to happen. She stood just inside the doorway and looked directly at Gerald Hargrove. Gerald's face did something I had never seen a face do in real life. It collapsed. Not dramatically, just structurally, like something underneath it gave way. Patricia turned, and then Patricia's face did the same thing. The woman said, "Gerald, I think you know why I am here." Her name was Margaret Ellison. I did not know that yet. I would learn it in the next 20 minutes, along with everything else. Gerald stood up slowly. "Margaret, this is not the time or the place. You have been saying that for 11 years, she said. I have decided the time and the place is now. Daniel leaned toward me and whispered, "I have no idea who that is." I believed him. He looked genuinely shaken. Margaret walked to the center of the room. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "My name is Margaret Ellison," she said clearly. 11 years ago, Gerald Hargrove and I were business partners in a property development firm. During that partnership, he redirected $4.2 million of investor funds into private accounts registered under shell companies. Those investors lost everything. 3 of them lost their homes. One of them was my brother. The room was completely silent now. I have spent 11 years building the legal documentation to prove it. This week, I filed that documentation with the district attorney's office. Gerald will be receiving formal notice by Monday morning. I came tonight because I wanted to look at the family he built with stolen money and make sure they understood where it came from. She placed the leather portfolio on the nearest table. She looked at Patricia. "Your house in Asheville was purchased in 2014 with funds from one of those accounts. Your daughter's trust fund was seeded with the same money. The vacation home in France. All of it." She looked around the room one final time. Then she walked back to the door. She stopped. She turned to look at me specifically. I do not know how she knew who I was, but she looked directly at me and she said, "I am sorry you had to hear this on your wedding week. You seem like someone who built what she has, honestly." And she left. The silence after the door closed lasted perhaps 10 seconds. It felt like 10 minutes. Then Gerald said Patricia's name very quietly, and Patricia stood up, picked up her bag, and walked out of the room without looking at anyone. Gerald followed her. Candace sat completely still, with her wine glass halfway to her mouth, frozen. My father cleared his throat. He picked up his fork. He looked at the remaining food on his plate. Then he said in his quiet Kentucky voice, "Well, I suppose we know now whose world has substance and whose does not." My mother covered her mouth with her hand, not to cry, to stop herself from laughing. Daniel looked at me. His face was a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like relief, like something he had been half suspecting for years had finally been named. "Nora," he said, "I'm so sorry." "Do not apologize to me," I told him. "You did not know. Are you okay?" I thought about it honestly for a moment. "Yes," I said. "I think I actually am." The wedding happened 3 weeks later as planned. Gerald did not attend. Patricia came, but did not speak to me once during the entire evening. Candace sat in the back and left before the cake was cut. My mother danced with my father for the first time in years. She wore the same dress she had worn to the dinner. She looked radiant. Daniel and I have been married for 2 years now. He has spent a great deal of that time coming to terms with the truth about his family's money. That process has not been easy for him. I have tried to be patient with it. Gerald's case is still moving through the legal system. Margaret Ellison's documentation was as thorough as she had promised. 3 other former investors came forward after the filing. Patricia has not called me since the wedding dinner. I have not called her either. I have thought about that evening many times since, about the way she looked at me across that table and said I lacked substance. About the fact that her entire life, the house, the vacations, the name, every single thing she used to measure other people, had been built on money stolen from people who trusted her husband. I was raised by a woman who cleaned other people's houses and a man who worked at a lumber yard. Every dollar in my life I earned, every client I built, every year of education I funded myself. If that is not substance, I genuinely do not know what the word means. I want to ask you something before you go. Have you ever sat in a room where someone used their money to make you feel small? Where everything they had gave them the right in their own mind to decide your worth? Drop the word substance in the comments if this story hits something real for you. And if you're new here, subscribe. I share stories like this every single week. Real stories about family, about truth, and about the moment the room finally sees what was always there. I will see you in the next one.